Hello, and welcome to our broadcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Pierce, a Regional Executive Director of Hospital Laboratory Operations at Providence. As a reminder, the information provided during this event is for educational purposes only. If you have any questions regarding medical conditions or treatment plans, please consult your physician. So I think we can go ahead and get started. Joining me today are Dr. Douglas Blackall. He is the Oregon Regional Core Lab Medical Director and Oregon Regional Blood Bank Medical Director at Providence in Oregon, and Melody Descateau, Regional Blood Bank Manager for Providence Inland Northwest Washington. So welcome, you guys.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you.
So first, why don't we get started by just telling us and the audience a little bit about what you do in your roles at Providence. So Dr. Blackall, did you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I have a number of roles. I'm a pathologist, and I have a number of roles with Providence, but most relevant to our discussion today is my position as Regional Blood Bank Medical Director. So very broadly speaking, I am responsible for assuring that patients get the right transfusions, get appropriately transfused, and have safe transfusion procedures.
Yeah, thank you for that. Melody?
Thank you. I have a very interesting role in the Providence system. The Inland Northwest Washington region has been contracted by Vitalant, and we have a transfusion service activity supported by Vitalant, who is on site at Sacred Heart Medical Center. And so I provide regional support for our two hospitals in Stevens County as a manager effect. And then here in Spokane, I work actively making sure the contract agreements and the activities with Vitalant are acceptable and appropriate. So I too, like Dr. Blackall, I am directly involved with suitability of transfusions for patient care for our hospital or our patients in Washington.
Yeah, it's a combined role, right, between the blood supplier and the transfusion service.
It is.
So we're here to talk about the importance of blood donations. So, Dr. Blackall, why is it important for hospitals and health centers to have normal supplies of blood?
Well, there's really two major reasons, I think. One is that the blood products we transfuse can only be obtained from blood donors. We don't have anything so high-tech as synthesized blood or artificial blood. So at this point in history, the blood products we transfuse are obtained from blood donors. So blood donors become very important because lots of patients are in need of blood products. And it's fair to say that all of the high-tech things that we do in medicine and very many low-tech things as well require transfusion. But just to name a few, transplantation of whatever sort, bleeding patients of whatever sort, trauma patients, pregnant women who bleed during delivery. So all of the innovations that we take for granted require blood products. And we transfuse about 20 million blood products in the United States every year, believe it or not.
And Melody, how do you see that importance of normal blood supplies in the area that you work in?
Being that I'm direct patient care and the locations that I manage are direct patient care from the laboratory perspective, it's very difficult to manage inventories and provide the perfect product for the patient if the product is not there. So as Dr. Blackall referenced, when we have a bleeding patient or multiple bleeding patients, which certainly can happen in large hospitals, it's so wonderful to be able to have the product available on the shelf. We can do the testing required, issue the product for the patient, and the patient receives the product timely. Delays in transfusion can be a very adverse event for the patient if they can't get the product when they need it. So having adequate blood supply is epitome of being able to provide stellar patient care when the patient needs it.
Yeah, and you are so correct. What I think everybody has probably seen some of the news stories out there about the national blood crisis. And so how is your current blood supply in your regions right now? So Dr. Blackall in Oregon, what are you seeing right now as our current blood supply status?
Yeah, well, with respect to Providence, we are actually doing reasonably well because we are well supported by BloodWorks Northwest, which is a large regional donor center that is established in Seattle. So we're doing okay, but in discussions with my colleagues in the Portland metro area at other healthcare institutions who might use other blood suppliers, they are not doing very, very well at all. And I view the blood supply as a community supply. We each have to help each other because there's not a Providence patient could end up anywhere in one of our hospitals. So if our blood supply is okay, but the academic medical centers is not, then our patients are potentially at risk. So we are doing okay, but it's pretty tenuous out there. And I talked to colleagues around the country, and it is really bad right now, particularly in Southern California. So it's just a difficult time overall.
Yeah, there seems to be pockets of low blood supply across the U.S. So Melody, what are you seeing in your region right now?
So for the Inland Northwest Washington region, we are doing well. Well, we are stable. We have the inventories we need. Products are on the shelf. When those products are transfused, then they are replenished. So as Dr. Blackall stated, the Providence locations in Inland Northwest Washington are doing fine. And in my peer group too, as Dr. Blackall stated, it's really ugly out in some areas. And it's very concerning because this is a community resource. And if your community is not stocked, then it's your whole community that's at risk, not just one group of patients. So we're stable, but it's very tenuous. It could change very quickly, as we all know.
Right. And what we've heard from some of our Providence colleagues in Southern California, the utilization may be a little bit higher down there. And we are hearing, even with multiple blood suppliers that are sourcing our hospital labs down there, they are still struggling with getting a normal supply of blood. So, Dr. Blackall, why do you think there is such a shortage? What is going on to prevent us from having the blood that we need to support all of our services in the hospitals and the outpatient settings?
Well, I think I could talk about that for about 20 minutes, but because it's really complicated. But I'm just going to give a little background to frame what I'm going to say. So the background is that we have a certain demand for blood, both locally and nationally, and we have a supply that we want to mirror or match that demand. And we can't over collect, because if we do, we risk wasting products. And that's just a horrible thing to do because it costs money. And I hate to think about doing that to a donor who's donated that blood. So it's a pretty close, pretty tight supply demand lines that we see, and that really have to be maintained. Sometimes especially at certain times of the year, we know that supply is going to drop. So around holiday time, when the weather is bad, when people are sick, like with flu, now with COVID, we know that there are going to be seasonal and short-term disruptions. But we blame COVID for everything, and rightfully so. And it has been very disruptive to our blood supply. Why? Everything that contributes to supply chain issues that COVID causes affects the blood supply. So we have labor shortages, we have material shortages, we have many people who are out who can't give blood. It's just, it makes it so much more difficult. And the blood system at large was not prepared for a pandemic. And that's no slight on the blood system. It's just the way it is. But that's, I think, really what we're struggling with now.
Yeah, Melody, what are you hearing from your blood supplier about why they think there is such a shortage?
I did ask that question of them, and they actually stated several things. Uncertainty being one of the biggest things, as Dr. Blackall stated, with COVID-19 being the cause of everything. The uncertainty of COVID-19 and donating and being around people is causing problems with blood collections, because the majority of blood collections are done in group settings, at mobiles that go to workplaces, schools, businesses, those sorts of things. When you have people that are working at home, when you have people schooling at home, and businesses are way scaled back or not even open, the blood collection centers are having a terrible time getting blood drives even scheduled. So it's the lack of availability of the donor that's certainly part of the issue. And then the age old one, and I use that pun purposefully, the donor base is aging, and as those of us who are on that end of the spectrum are aging up, not out, but up, there is not the volume of younger donors that are coming into the system. Vitalant did a review, and they found that for the Vitalant system in 2021, they saw 58,000 fewer individuals donating blood through their programs, even though they have extensive outreach programs. So that's quite a large, tidy sum of donations that are not being given from these particular people. So those are some of the things that they've mentioned, and also said that the age-old one, about 60% of us are eligible to donate, and only 3% do. Those are tough numbers.
Yeah. And why do they think that there is such a decline in donations from particular age groups?
There's been some, through my whole career in blood bank, there's been that change of service attitude and perspective from people. And so the service concept is not as strong as it used to be, and donating blood is considered a service activity. There's other time availability, as far as I just mentioned, when people are more home centered and not community centered, it is more difficult to get to a donation center or to a blood drive, or a blood drive that doesn't exist. So there's basic habits of problems with that too.
Yeah, and blood drives they're further apart, it seems.
Yes.
Like fewer blood drives, and they're further apart. It just takes a little bit longer, and it takes more time.
Yes, it does.
So, Dr. Blackall, what happens in healthcare settings when there is a big shortage and we don't have the blood that we need?
Yeah, it's a real problem, and I'll just give you an example. Over the New Year's holiday weekend, in the Portland area, for about 24 hours, we had about 6 units of platelets for everybody. And that's a real problem, because what that means is, and what I had to do and was happy to do, for every platelet order that came into one of our Providence hospitals, I had to determine if that patient was really at highest need for one of those platelets. And so every order had to be triaged and evaluated, and patients who normally would have, without question, been transfused because it was clearly appropriate, had to wait. And that's not something I'm used to. And, it's just not acceptable. But it was the reality of the situation. Fortunately, we've rebounded nicely, but this is what happens. Patients who need blood and deserve it can't get it. And that could have serious ramifications.
Yeah. Melody, what are you seeing in your organization over in Spokane related to blood supply? Are you seeing any ramifications about patient care related to not having the blood that you need?
So far, with our stable inventory, we've been very good. The piece, though, that people don't see is laboratory people are in their fields of specialty because that's what we do. We love what we do. And in blood bank, the blood bankers, they're there to collect blood, process it, and issue it to patients and make sure it's very safe for them. When they don't have blood products to work with, it's very stressful. It adds a huge amount of stress to how best to deal with the situation, because they're trying to get the blood products in if they're available, work with the products and get them ready for testing. But then we've got the floor calling saying, I really need this. Then we need to call our medical directors like Dr. Blackall and say, we need help triaging orders and and determining which patients will receive these products. So it creates a huge amount of chaos that it just really is difficult. So all of us blood bankers have worked through it, and we will continue to as the situations arise, but it's never easy.
No, it's a hard place to be for anybody to have to make those decisions, and particularly when you see a refrigerator of what is supposed to be there and it's greatly decreased and you don't have enough blood to give to everybody. Fortunately, we don't have to experience it too much, but there are situations where we do encounter that situation. So just to switch gears a little bit, I think there's a lot of questions out there about, is it safe to donate blood during this COVID pandemic? So Dr. Blackall, what are your thoughts about, is it safe to donate blood during this time?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm fortunate to have had the opportunity to donate blood quite a few times during the pandemic. So I can see what is done to protect both those who collect the blood and those who donate. So as you can imagine, everybody has the correct personal protective equipment in place: masks, gloves, both masks for donors and masks and gloves and other things for those who collect. These donations are usually made in large places where social distancing can be maintained. So I think it's a very safe environment. Nobody should hesitate to give blood because they are concerned about the safety with respect to COVID.
Yeah, and Melody, what has been your experience as far as safety of donating blood?
I too have donated several times during the COVID pandemic, and it is the same. I feel very comfortable in the environments because they treat them like a healthcare environment with all the safety precautions that Dr. Blackall discussed. So I don't find it scary, and others that have concerns about it, there are these protections in place, and it's a very comfortable setting. So come on down. The collection centers would love to have you.
Absolutely. So this is a very specific question about, giving blood, and along the same lines as the safety of giving blood. Is there a cause of concern of reducing your COVID fighting antibodies? What are your thoughts on that, Dr. Blackall? Are we putting ourselves in danger for donating blood and being more vulnerable to the COVID virus?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable question, no doubt. The quick answer is no. When we obtain blood from a donor, we actually take out a very small volume compared to your entire blood volume. And then that's only transient. That we would be removing any COVID fighting antibodies. The cells in your body continue to pump out those antibodies, and you would be replenished really almost immediately. So nobody should be concerned about that.
And what are your thoughts too about the vaccination status of a person who wants to donate blood? Are there any reasons why vaccination status should be an issue?
Well, first of all, I would encourage everybody to be vaccinated who is eligible. It's incredibly important. But no, there are no restrictions placed on donors whether you're vaccinated or not vaccinated. So you could be vaccinated today and give blood today, or if you feel well and healthy, or if you're unvaccinated, you are just as eligible a donor.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Melody, I think you recently contributed to an article on blood donations. And I think the article was mentioning a little bit about O-positive donors. And I think most of us have probably heard that specifically type O blood is really what's in big shortage right now. So can you talk to us a little bit about the universal blood type and why type O blood is so important right now?
Oh, our Group O donors are very special people because their product is used very frequently in those cases that we've talked a little bit about. O donors, that their red cells don't have antigens that other blood types have. I'm an A and I have A antigen on my red cells. Well, O donors don't have that. And so in the cases where we need blood and we need it fast, we are able to use O red cells for these patients. Then once we are able to test if they're a different blood type, we can switch them over. So the O red cell is very important for pediatric cases, specifically neonatal and small children that are in crisis or newly born or those kinds of cases. So O Rh negative donors are actually their primo selection. And so if you're an O Rh negative person, we really want you to come donate. But still, when we have traumas or a massive bleeding event that is unexpected, we always can go to our Group O red cells for that initial support. And so if we don't have it, there's, as Dr. Blackall said, there's really nothing else as far as a synthetic red cell to provide. So having that particular item on our shelves is really critical to meet the needs of that that urgently bleeding patient.
Yes, and and that's a particular blood product group. But Dr. Blackall, you were talking also about platelets, and did you want to talk about why platelets are so important and why they are so in short supply?
Yeah, platelets are a little bit different than red cells as far as supply and demand go. But I think what everybody should know is that platelets are the small cells produced by our bone marrow that help us to clot and to stop bleeding events. And there are certain patients who are absolutely always in need of platelets. And the largest user of platelet products are hematology oncology patients who get chemotherapy that temporarily stops their bone marrows from working, and they become transfusion dependent. Your platelets only last in your circulation for about 9 or 10 days. And when we collect platelets from donors, we can only keep them on the shelf for 5 days, maybe 7 days at the max with certain sorts of precautions, but it's a very limited shelf life. So what that means is we have to have a constant stream of platelet donors in order to keep our shelves full and have products for our patients, because they are products with a short shelf life. So if there's any disruption in production, so to speak, meaning donor collection, that can have very quickly have ramifications for our ability to provide platelets for patients.
Yeah, and Melody, what is your experience with platelets in your region? Do you struggle getting platelets within your transfusion services? How much of a shortage in platelets do you experience?
As we see in many blood products, it's episodic. If donors aren't coming in, as Dr. Blackall stated, we don't have product. But what's really nice is the platelets are typically collected on an instrument that provides the ability to collect more than one platelet product at a time. So for those donors who have great platelet counts, the blood collection establishment can collect up to 3 to 4 platelet products per one donation. So these kinds of activities that maximize the donor's experience in donating the product that's needed is very, very important and has shown to be a great asset to collecting the blood products needed when they're needed and getting them to the hospitals. So this is the apheresis process, and it's a great process for those that can qualify for it. We can really get a lot of product from one donation.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about what that entails, the difference between a whole blood donation and an apheresis donation?
It's kind of neat. The acceptance for the blood donor as far as their health history is the same. So they still need to be an eligible blood donor. But as they are then selected for the apheresis process, the donor then is evaluated for if they have enough red cells. They could potentially give 2 red cells in one donation. How cool is that? Or they could give 1 red cell and a plasma and a platelet, or 2 or 3 or 4 platelets, just no red cells. So it's a matter that the blood collection center would evaluate the donor's current laboratory results, determine what the blood product, the blood establishment needs to collect, and then see what the donor is eligible to donate and program it into the device. And then you sit back and have a nice time and donate your blood products, and we're all happy. It's a great process.
Yeah, and all blood suppliers, do all of them offer those services?
To my knowledge, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, to my knowledge, yes.
All right. Well, we talked a lot about the process and the state of affairs of our blood supply. What are some of the ways that you're working within your communities or with your blood suppliers specifically to try to solve this problem? So, Dr. Blackall in Oregon, what have you done to address the blood shortage and maybe work within your community to solve this problem?
Yeah, we're doing something in Portland that I've never done in my 25 plus years in this field, which is I'm collaborating closely with my colleagues in other blood systems. So we have 5 major healthcare organizations in the Portland area. And we started meeting a couple of weeks ago, representatives from each of these organizations to talk about our blood supplies, to share the status of our inventories. And we're working to start sharing resources, meaning move blood around to those who are in greatest need in the Portland area. And that's just not something I've ever done before. It's really great. I'm having a good time just dealing with this and meeting these folks and working with them. But it's not something we typically do. We're sort of insulated in our own healthcare systems. But I think the time that we're in, which is somewhat dire, requires these creative approaches to try to meet the needs, not just of single hospitals, but of entire communities.
Yeah. And it goes to your point, Melody, about taking care of the community. It is a community resource, which you had mentioned before. So are you doing something similar in Spokane?
Interestingly enough, the Spokane blood banking setting has been a centralized approach since the early 40s. Mm-hmm. So Vaccination Spokane provides services to all of the locations in the Spokane and Inland Northwest region. So they are very nimble at pulling blood from one spot and putting it into another and moving that inventory around as necessary. So with their centralized approach, they have effectively done the same thing that Portland and Dr. Blackall is looking at, because we don't have as many silos as Portland does as far as health systems. And the health systems are very collegial in getting that information and moving it around. But the Vaccination Collection Center is the pivot of that activity. So far we've been doing very well. And then as the other pieces internally, when we're notified of issues, we then will put the notice out to our critical care folks. And I always put at the bottom, as far as what can we do to solve this, to help alleviate this problem, I always put it as the last bullet point in bright red: donate.
And that's a good time for us to remind everybody to definitely take the time and donate for our universal blood supply. So thank you, Dr. Blackall. Thank you, Melody, for joining us today, and to everyone for listening and sending in any of your questions. But if you're looking for help with medical advice, please visit providence.org. And then make sure to follow Providence on social media at Providence on Twitter and under Providence Health System on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Thank you all.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you.